Thanks for joining me, Rosemary Armao, for Beyond the Brink and Fighting Back. To catch you up, in our last chapter, we talked with Deb Gordon, who is a just retired journalist, an old friend of mine, who's joined the growing ranks of Americans who are leaving home. They're just leaving the country, not just for a visit, not for a little trip, but they're just becoming expats, ex-citizens living. Deb is now living in Portugal. But in this chapter, I'm getting to talk with and to introduce you to another special friend, an amazing woman. We worked together in Bosnia for years. This is Stella Roque. She has also left home. Honestly, I don't really know exactly where she is right now. We have to ask her that. Someplace in Asia. Stella describes herself as an American nomad, and I'm going to let you tell her why that is and how this came about. So, Stella, go.
Hello. So I'm coming in to you from India today, as of the recording of this podcast. I'm actually in northern India in Rishikesh. It's going to be Holi in 4 days, so everybody's going to be throwing a lot of colored powder at each other and water balloons. Little known fact, you will get sprayed with a lot of water too. But yeah, it's really interesting because, for years of my life when I was younger, I was inspired by reading a lot of travel logs. And I noticed a lot of travel logs were often written by men. They weren't about like women on adventures, and especially more historical ones. And I kind of became more interested. Well, where are the women adventurers? Why aren't there like more stories about women kind of striking off historically and traveling? So that kind of got me started in my younger days as a teenager, kind of imagining, well, what would it be like to out somewhere, to go out to a foreign country, to maybe learn a language that you didn't know? So that's kind of a bit where my journey started. I did start traveling almost right off the bat. Like at 18 years old, I knew I wanted to move quite far away from home. After
Where,
college, I
where
knew
is
I
home?
wanted to go to grad school abroad. So home for me, I was raised in Milford, Massachusetts, tiny little town outside of Boston. My parents themselves, they were immigrants, so they came from Portugal. So I was kind of, a first generation immigrant raised between two different cultures. I did learn a second language at home, and I kind of grew up like with sort of a wider point of view about the world that wasn't just like, one single culture. And that helped really inform me about like, well, there's so much out there to explore that I don't even know yet, and made me kind of interested in, I don't know, I used to daydream a lot when I was younger. I used to be like, I don't want to be a small town girl my whole life. I want to like, I really want to go on these adventures. I've always wanted a life that was a little different from other people, maybe a bit unconventional. And it even led me to sort of an exploration. I mean, as you know, Rosemary, I worked with investigative journalists and with you in Bosnia to kind of look for careers that would also allow for the flexibility of travel. So that's a little bit of where my journey began.
What was the first place that you went to, Stella?
Where I first struck off was for graduate school. The first time I went abroad was London. So that was the first time I got on a plane by myself, where I was like, all right, I'm going to go to a totally different country on my own. Before I had visited Portugal, but that was more to see family with my parents, and that was for a very short time, like maybe like a week or two at a time, and usually every few years. But to go to London on my own in grad school was really the start of my getting this taste of a travel bug because I got the chance, number one, to like live on my own, to live somewhere totally different. And London is kind of a melting pot for the entire world. If you've been there, you know that everyone from cultures all around the world basically land in London. You have restaurants with all sorts of food. It was also like the first time I tried Ethiopian food was in graduate school because I was like, wow, like I didn't know this cuisine existed. Um, and it was just a bit of an exploration. I had roommates of mine when I was in graduate school from Greece, from Hong Kong, and also a couple of Americans as well. And I remember our Greek friends would cook almost every single night in the kitchen. They would invite us to dine with them. And we became such good friends that, speaking about like the second place I went after London, they actually invited us to Greece for a wedding. So I got to actually also experience a Greek wedding and like go there and fly there and be hosted by them. And it wasn't necessarily in Athens. We actually ended up going to like a very tiny town on the border of Albania, which was absolutely beautiful. And I just kind of came to this realization, oh my God, I really want to be able to visit different places. I want to be able to just explore. And I mean, this Greek wedding was really nuts. There was a lot of food, there was a lot of dancing. They also had a really interesting tradition in this really tiny town that the wife like gets a whip and like whips her like newlywed husband. It was really, really funny. It was just amazing. And I kind of went through this where in London, like meeting all these people from so many different countries and also like hearing their stories about where they came from, that I was like, I started making a list of like all these places I had to go visit before I died. Um, and all the things that I wanted to see before I died. I would say living in the UK was interesting because, on the one hand, people think everyone speaks English and it's quite familiar. But then you learn that British culture has a lot of distinctions from America that are just very, very different. There's a lot of things that are unsaid in the culture. It's very, very polite. Um, and it was also interesting to kind of also see how class interacted in Britain,
Mhm.
whether that was like meeting fellow classmates who were from different classes in Britain, all of them who had like very, very diverse opinions about their own politics, or also even getting invited, for example, with a friend to a trip to Edinburgh to see Scotland, which
Mhm.
I absolutely loved. She and I, we spent Christmas together, and we actually ended up climbing up Arthur's Seat to watch the sunrise. And Arthur's Seat is this very large hill, like right outside of Edinburgh, that's absolutely beautiful. And we woke up like very early in the morning. It was utterly freezing. I think we brought like a bottle of like Bailey's Irish Cream, like to drink by the time we got to the top. And it was just like a Christmas morning in Edinburgh and us just having drinks like up here on this place, like overlooking all of Edinburgh and like the coast. It was just like absolutely marvelous. I think what happens is once you start on the process of traveling, you have such interesting experiences. It becomes less about material things and more about having experiences
Experiences.
that you realize,
And there you have it.
well,
I wanted Stella to explain to you what it is that hooks you, that makes you want to keep coming back. You're different after you travel. I do also want to explain to our listeners that because we are so far away, both in distance and also across, like, I don't know, 20, 25 time zones. I don't know that there's a bit of a lag between when I'm speaking and when Stella hears me. So don't think that this is going to be a challenge for my poor engineers who will put this together. But Stella epitomizes to me what I wanted to do, what I think a lot of people want to do, which is to step out of your own regular, normal life, the life you inherit, and do something different, to have, you called it an adventure. But most people don't do it, Stella. They get a job, they have family obligations, they have life obligations. They never do what I did for a little while. I came step back into it to take care of a sick mother. You're still doing it. And it takes a certain amount of, I don't know if it's courage or recklessness, but to just say, okay, I'm going to just jump over the cliff. I'm going to just see what happens. You did that. You gave up. You didn't just go off on this current Asian tour. You left a job, you left a network of friends, you left family. Talk about that.
absolutely. So I think it becomes, I'm definitely not immune from kind of like wanting what, like, we're kind of conditioned when we're younger that you have to reach these milestones in adulthood.
Right.
Like you have to get a house by X age, you have to get married by X age, you should have kids by X age. By X age, you should be at a certain place in your career. And if you're not, you're not considered successful. My mother in particular was always very concerned about me when I was abroad. You met me in my 20s, early 30s when I was in Bosnia. And actually, around that time, she was actually like quite bugging me to come back. She had been the one who's like, you need to settle down, you need to build up a retirement. You can't be like doing this zany life, like living in this like country and you're not making that much money. She was really concerned about me financially. And on some level, your mother is right. There are some things in your life you should get together, for some level of financial security. But I noticed, Rosemary, that every time I tried to come back home, every time I tried to be rooted or to live, that so-called normal life, it was incredibly difficult for me. And I don't know if it's something of my character that had problems adjusting to being rooted.
Mhm.
And also to not just to being rooted, but to also have the tolerance of being unhappy. Because some people, I think, have a certain tolerance that they'll stay in a job for a very long number of years, even if they're not totally satisfied, or they'll stay in a relationship for a very long time with a spouse where they're not necessarily happy, but they'll do it for the kids, right? Or they'll do it for financial security. And one of the things in my character that I've struggled with is I have a huge intolerance for unhappiness. And maybe that is a little reckless. Like some people would look at me and be like, that's really immature. Like you should suffer like the rest of us. And that's not to say I don't experience a certain amount of suffering in life. I think life will wing you suffering regardless of your situation. I definitely posted like quite publicly on Facebook that throughout the years of my life, I have struggled with depression, but I've never wanted to take medicines for it, for example. I've wanted to find more holistic ways to like handle it and even philosophical ways. And so at the point in my life that I decided to strike out to Asia, I literally I sold all the furniture in my apartment, Rosemary. I like just decided I also had this epiphany that I owned so much stuff that I didn't use. Because at the time when I was having like a stable job, I was spending so much money shopping. I had a closet full of clothing I didn't wear. I had things that I wasn't actually utilizing. I bought tons of books, many of which I've never had time to read because of work. And I was just like, well, what am I doing? I'm working to make money. Oh, great. I have like some disposable income, but now I'm spending this disposable income on stuff I actually don't use. And by the time I got to like breaking point, I was like, I can't live like this anymore. Like this stuff just, everything has to go. Like I just need to start over. And this was actually a mildly anxiety-ridden thing to do at 40 years old because at 40 you're like, I should be settled now, But
You've
I
missed
just
several
decided, you know
milestones.
what? When I,
I said that you've missed
yeah,
several milestones.
like, yeah, because but I had this moment where when you met me, when I came to Bosnia, it was a very similar situation. I had been in the middle of a divorce. And
Mhm.
I had also just walked away from like everything. And I bought a ticket with no plan, ended up in Paris, and that's where I met Mark Lee Hunter, who
Yeah.
I know you interviewed on one of your
Yes.
podcasts.
Yes, he did.
And
He's a
Mark was the one who Mark was actually, yeah, and Mark was the one who actually told me, hey, there's this group of journalists out in Bosnia. They pay peanuts, but you would love working for them. And I had bought like a one-way ticket there. And that was also in the middle of a very transitional phase in my life. But by then, I had been hopping around quite a lot in my 20s. But now at 40, I was like, you know what? I've done this before, so I can do it again. And I don't think I should let age be a factor to hold me back because age is just a number at the end of the day. I say if you have health and capability, you can change your life in an instant if you really, really want to. And in that moment, after getting rid of all my stuff, there was this tiny urge inside me. It said, buy a one-way ticket to India. You've always wanted to go to India. Why not?
amazing.
And I was like, well, let's do it. We're gonna stuff our whole life into one suitcase and we're gonna buy a one-way ticket to India. And I did this without really any coherent plan. I decided to enroll in a yoga course, as one does when one goes to India, because I thought, why not? I've always wanted to do that too. But I really showed up with absolutely no plan and definitely no job security. I still had no idea what I was going to do next. but I luckily had saved enough throughout my life, living as a frugal college student, I like to joke, that I had enough resources to just be able to kind of strike out. And in doing that, it made me realize, like, you know what? I have this very odd philosophy in life that I kind of gained traveling in my 20s, that sometimes if you're not sure of your direction or you're feeling a bit restless, the kind of just picking up and relocating yourself somewhere entirely new, like kind of purposely creating a little chaos in your life, will actually open up opportunities that you wouldn't otherwise expect, whether it's through meeting people or even just in general growing through the experiences that you're having. So in doing that, I think that was probably, I've done a lot of crazy things in my life. I think traveling has been really a precursor to kind of just be like, okay, well, let's just go and see what happens.
Amazing.
And that's what
This is
adventure is, right?
It is adventure. You're describing adventure. And again, it's something that looks so easy on TV when you have a little show and people are doing this thing. But to do it in real lifestyle, I mean, you had actual jobs you did in Bosnia and you left that and said, okay, I'm going to go back. We thought, oh, you're just going to go back to the United States. She's returning to, to home. And then you blew that up too to go. And we should tell people when did your current adventure in Asia begin?
Started a little over a year ago. So I've been traveling for about a year now.
Yeah, that's stunning. And again, you just sold everything, packed up, and went to a place you'd never been before with very little plan for what was going to come next, and just let it happen to you.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay,
And
I have to ask you some plebeian questions. Okay, this is what people listening to you might ask. Do you ever get homesick? Where is home?
so it's funny. I think I've expanded my definition of home since I kind of began on this journey because already in my 20s, I was hopping country to country. And for me, I think home is wherever you really make it. I do feel everywhere I go, I'm pretty like friendly and outgoing. I find it so easy to make friends. I actually often find it, I feel like sometimes in the US, there's a culture of isolation where people
Mhm.
really don't get to know each other like very well, or unless you've had longtime friends from school or maybe a few people you've managed to keep from your career, it becomes like very difficult to really make friends naturally in the United States. Whereas I feel abroad, people are much more open to like friendship. They're open to that connection. They're open to kind of spontaneously getting together. I've often found that I have much more friends abroad than I do in the US. I have like a handful of American friends that I've met throughout my career who live in the United States, but often they're living in different places. They've started families, and I think that also becomes a little bit of a divide when you kind of haven't gone the conventional route and everybody else has. So then you kind of
Mhm.
drift apart a little bit. People come to you at different phases of life. And I always found wherever I am, I can make friends. And I tend to there's a level of proximity that where you are, where you meet people, and you do find community. It is possible. When you're traveling, you do find a community of people, which is really nice. I now have friends like scattered across India, which is wonderful. I have friends in Nepal now. I've also made friends while I was in Thailand. So it's nice to know that there's sort of like you can build community wherever you go. And if you choose to stay just a little longer, like it's not a holiday or vacation, but you choose to stay like maybe 2 months, 3 months in a place, you
Mhm.
really do start realizing, wow, people really want to make friends. They want to take you out. They want to introduce you to their culture. And they even enjoy the intercultural exchange with you and to joke with you about like the differences in culture. So there's definitely that. So I would say home is wherever you make it. It is wherever you make it, truly.
You realize that what you're describing would be a nightmare for many people. I'm thinking of my mother who would say, "Oh my God, you're living out of a suitcase," which I find quite great. I'd like to do that. She was horrified by the idea of having, a hotel room was as stable a place as you got, and that was only for a few days. You have given up all security. Do you feel safe when you're traveling? You're a woman traveling alone. Oh my goodness. Aren't there rules against that?
Right? So I say take precautions. It's really important. I say, especially if you are what we call a female solo traveler, do your research, do your homework. Don't entirely like hop to a place without like understanding the local culture. I definitely, for example, in India, will dress slightly more conservatively. Like I definitely won't show my knees because knees are scandalous here. Although depending where you are, like if you're in Goa or in Rishikesh, I have seen women in shorts. So it depends. I think it's very important that women in particular do their homework about where they're going. I think also I have noticed, at least for the places that I've chosen to go, I've never felt unsafe. I've generally, and that's also using common sense as well. Like after a certain hour of night, I will not be hanging out on the streets, you know? Like there's certain places where people are getting drunk or they're partying, and maybe you don't want to be around like that crowd of, drunk men who are on the streets, for example.
Mhm.
So I think everything requires a certain level of common sense. I definitely don't apply, the standards of like Western Europe here in India. I don't assume I can go out late or necessarily be safe, for example. But I think generally speaking, it really depends on where you are and where you choose to be. Rishikesh, India, for example, which is considered the yoga capital of the world, is very popular among internationals. So there's like a good set of international people here, an international community. And on top of that, a really wonderful set of locals that run cafes, bookshops, like small local businesses. And they all tend to be very kind, very welcoming, very like willing to help out if you have any like problems. So it really, but if you're in the middle of, I have generally in India avoided very large cities
Mhm.
because I don't like large crowds. And I also think large cities, India has mega cities. It's one of the most populous places in the world. But for me, there's more comfort going to smaller places in India. One, you get much better air quality, not as much air pollution.
Mhm.
Two, you get to really, if you stay long term in the smaller places, it's like living in a small village or in a town. Everybody knows everybody else. And there's something very wonderful and very like soothing about that. Because if I go to breakfast at a local cafe, all the owners and waitstaff know me. And that's really wonderful. Some of the people who stay more long term, and I have met other nomads who are also long-term travelers.
Mhm.
They're either as tourists, some of them are digital nomads. And, I've made friends with them and they become like a bit of a local community where you are. And if you travel elsewhere, some of them have been to the places you're planning to travel to, and they'll instantly give you recommendations about where to go, where to stay. So there's also this community of nomads that you can meet while you are going abroad.
I love this, a community of nomads. I try to teach students in a class on foreign reporting what it means to travel. It's a difficult thing to explain to people like my mother who think that living out of a suitcase is terrible. But there's a special thing that happens to people who become nomads, who do travel, who are the difference between a tourist and a traveler. It's very different. I can no longer go to one place and stay for a week, which is the standard vacation in the United States. That's like nothing. I mean, if it isn't a couple of months or maybe a year or just maybe live there for a while, it doesn't feel like you've really soaked up the culture, the people. Can you put words to what I'm trying to say, Stella? Because you've done it a lot more than me. What does it mean to really travel?
I think I've always valued an immersion in culture. For example, and that's something that you and I totally agree on because I've never really believed in the 1 week vacation. Because in the 1 week vacation, a lot of it can be very superficial, right? And I think some people who are a little bit more anxious about traveling, they tend to like book like I don't know, like if they've got the money, a 5-star hotel or maybe a tour package or and not to knock on cruises because I would love to go on a cruise one day and there are some really nice cruises out there. But it's a much more isolated experience when you're a vacationer. Um, but to actually go to someplace long term and to really open yourself up to meeting locals, one of the best experiences I've had here in India was very early on last year during my yoga course. We took a trek up to a temple on the hills of Rishikesh called Kunjapuri, and it's where you can see the sunrise. It's a beautiful, like, goddess temple up in the hills. And I actually met I met a nath yogi. And what a nath yogi is, it's a kind of a sadhu, it's a renunciate. And he was a younger nath yogi. And these are the groups of yogis who are the founders of the original Hatha yoga system. So the
Mhm.
yoga that we know now actually originated from this spiritual sect of people. And when I met him, it was kind of like it was kind of like meeting the odd couple because he was there at the temple, but he was with this 6 foot tall Texan man who was dressed up fully like a religious Hindu, had a big beard, a lovely person, and also with a Singaporean man, also kind of decked out in spiritual clothing. And by spiritual clothing, I mean they were wearing clothing that was unstitched, like literally just kind of blankets. And they were so fun to talk to. And the yogi sat next to me and he looked at me and he said, "Well, if you're so interested in spirituality, we're having this conversation about Eastern and Western spirituality." He's like, "Well, you should come to me. I'm going to Assam, to Kamakia. Like these two, they've traveled with me for a while. Why don't you come to Assam in June? There's a huge pilgrimage there, that's like very sacred to this particular goddess temple." And he's like, "I'll meet you there and I'll give you like a taste of like what Indian spirituality, what Tantra is." And I thought, well, this is a bit crazy because I've just met this person. We met for tea like a couple of times after before he had to leave. So he was taking his Singaporean friend to his ashram in Nepal.
Mhm.
But we kept in contact, we kept in touch. And realizing that I wasn't coming back to the States so soon, I just thought, well, screw it. It's monsoon season in India. It's really hot. Why don't I just do this trip to Assam? And the ironic thing is, Rosemary, is actually in my apartment 2 years earlier in the United States, I had had a picture of this exact temple in my house, because I had been reading books on Indian spirituality at the time. And but I never imagined I would actually go visit this temple because
Mhm.
it's so far away. It's a bit of a journey to get there. But then I was like, okay, I have a local with me. I'm not alone. So I'm gonna go do it. And by far it was number one of the most awe-inspiring experiences of my life because I was like, wow, just 2 years back I had a picture of this temple in my apartment in the US,
Yeah.
and now I'm actually here at this temple. And the other amazing thing was to see so many sadhus. Many of them came down from the Himalayas or out of the jungles or the caves where they meditated, and they all like conglomerated at this temple during this time. And it was just this huge religious, spiritual festival there. And it was so much fun. I got to meet actually a pilgrim. He was Indian American. If I remember correctly, he came from Kansas. And he told me a really great story about himself that he was also like a competitive swimmer. He'd like swum across the English Channel, like made the attempt to swim across the English Channel twice. Very, very interesting man. And I also met a man from South India he was a householder, so he's married with a family, but he was also a tantric. So he practiced like tantra and he helped give spiritual advice to like his local community. So he made the pilgrimage to this like temple in Assam at the time. And they were so open to like taking me to see things that the average, like if you were an average tourist, you
Never see
probably wouldn't have gone to see.
Well, I want to take credit. We are listening, by the
Yeah.
way. If you're just tuning in, you're listening to Beyond the Brink, and my guest today is my old friend Stella Roque, who is a American nomad. That's how she describes herself. She is traveling through and has been for a year now, different countries in Asia And her pictures and her stories on Facebook are stunning. I'm stealing some and putting them on my Facebook for you to look at what she's been doing. I'm taking
Right.
credit because when she first started posting, there would be these beautiful pictures and I would have no idea where she was or what that was supposed to represent. And I said, you have to write captions. And she has, and there are many stories. I'm so glad you're doing that. It becomes almost like a travelogue, but it is a travelogue. It becomes a mini book actually. And I'm going to have you. I want you to talk about one of your more recent stories. I think it was India, but I don't know. It might have been someplace else you've been, Stella, where you went into the cave and learned the story of the man who lived there with the cobras.
Yeah, so in Rishikesh, there's Rishikesh is considered like one of India's holy cities. It's right on the Ganga River. So it's actually a part of the Ganga that you can dip in. Like the water is actually very clear. I feel very blessed because there's no pollution in the water. So if you want to take a little swim in the Ganga here, you actually can. Um, and there's a lot of caves around Rishikesh where really famous saints used to actually reside in those caves. So this particular cave I went to visit is across the river on the other side. It's a little bit of a trek to get to, but it's not so far away that it's impossible. And the name of the cave is Tatwali Baba Cave. And the man who used to live there was considered a great saint, so a lot of miracles were attributed to him. And he
Mhm.
also had the power of foresight, like he could tell the future. And many people who came to him to ask him questions, like he was able to read their minds, he was able to actually even advise them on the right thing to do. And he kind of lived in an era where I think there were a few other contemporary modern saints that lived at the time that he lived as well. But this was around the time in Rishikesh, for example, when the Beatles came here. Like it was kind of that time when the West was becoming more interested in yoga, in meditation. And so this cave, I had wanted to visit it for a while because I had read the story of this saint. And I told myself, if I come back to Rishikesh, I'm going to go find this cave. And I decided to do it like almost like the first full day that I arrived. Um, but I ended up like walking there and it's kind of hidden. You actually wouldn't be able to see it because there at least I didn't see a sign at all that like pointed to where this cave was. I kind of was following Google Maps and Google Maps can be, by the way, hit or miss in India because sometimes it's not accurate at all as to what you're seeing on the map versus where you're actually going. Um, but I ended up taking this really long walk up to the area is called Lakshman Jula. And I stopped by one of the temples there. It's known as Bhutnath Temple. It's the temple dedicated to Lord Shiva as the Lord of the Elements, or some might say the Lord of the Ghosts. So I went there, I decided to get a quick blessing, and then I kept walking and I made it up the road. And so there's a road with cars, and I'm like, well, I don't see anything here. I see like a lot of hillside and a lot of rocks and trees. And then I was looking at the map and I'm like, well, it's supposed to be here, but I don't see where this cave is. But then I began seeing kind of like some structures that looked cave-like. And I'm like, well, maybe it's here. And I kept walking. I just like walked down the road a little more. And at some point I saw a footpath, like with stairs. And I looked up the hill and I'm like, there's some shacks there. And I said, well, I'm a woman alone. I hope like there's nothing shady going on up there. But I decided, I decided, well, I really want to find this cave. I've like done my 20,000 steps today to try to find this cave. I walked a lot. And I climbed up the hill. I just decided, well, screw it, the worst that can happen is I bump into somebody. It's gonna be fine. So I climbed up the hill into the forest. And at some point, I found what looked like a shrine, but I wasn't certain that I was in the right place. And I kind of looked around and it was very, very peaceful. And then out of nowhere, this sadhu appeared. And he had like a big smile on his face. And then after like a few seconds, he was like pointing me to the shrine. He's like, go in there, go in there. And I went in and I realized that this was the tomb of that saint, Tatwali Baba. Like his samadhi was actually there. They call it a samadhi in India because they say in India that saints don't ever die. They've samadhi is kind of this other word for moksha, like they're liberated souls, they're free. So I I went into his samadhi and I was just so moved. I was like, oh my gosh, I found it. I found like his cave. I found like his tomb. So I paid my respects there. And I realized after a few minutes that the sadhu had made a vow of silence. So he wasn't talking. So he was speaking to me all in sign language, but he was being super welcoming. He was like trying to like sign me about like where to go. And then he signed me like to go like up a bit around through the forest to actually find the actual cave. And he basically invited me, he said like go in, don't worry about it. And I think he was signing me go and meditate there for a little bit. So I climbed up and I got a little bit lost, but then eventually he would pop up out of nowhere and then sign me on my way to like find this cave. And then, and yeah, so I found Tatwali Baba's cave, and legend has it that in this cave where he meditated, they said that for those who witnessed it, that he would be in like a very deep meditation, like in a total trance. They said that he was in samadhi, he's in this state of liberation. That there were these two large black cobras that actually wrapped themselves around his body while he meditated. And they said that these two cobras lived with him until his death, that they actually lived in the cave with him.
His death that came 10 minutes after he met
Yeah.
them.
Well,
You know?
well, actually, I mean, there actually is a story that Tatwali Baba predicted his death, and he was actually assassinated,
Oh,
which
wow.
was quite a sad story. There was another sadhu who lived in a cave next door who was very jealous of him because he attracted so many people, and because he had gained these miraculous powers. And he even told one of his closest disciples, his devotees, he gave him the exact date that he would die. He said, "This is what's going to happen to me. I'm going to get shot. This man is going to kill me and I'm going to die." And he predicted his own death. And his devotee was like, "No, no, no, we can stop this." And he said, "No, no, no, you're not here to stop this. This has to happen. It's karma. Like, this has to occur. So let it go." And the devotee had to keep this secret because he shared it only with this one devotee. And then it actually happened. He was assassinated by this man. And I mean, that's why his tomb is there, but like he had predicted his own death before like he actually died. But the snake in India has like a very powerful spiritual symbol. It's like considered the symbol of like what they call the Kundalini in yoga, that it's like this spiritual energy that like rises up your spine to enlighten you. So they say that among some of the greatest saints, and Tatwali Baba is not the only one. I think there was another one called Neem Karoli Baba, who you might know as the teacher of Ram Dass. Ram
Mhm.
Dass was very famous in the United States for like his research on LSD and then his own spiritual journey to India.
Right.
And his own teacher, Neem Karoli Baba, was also said to have had snakes wrapped around him while he meditated. So
Right. It's the
it's it's a very
one part of
interesting
your
sort of
travels I have not enjoyed.
thing.
So, okay, I have many questions when I hear these stories and read them when you put them on Facebook. One is, he signed you. He told you you don't speak any of the languages of India, I don't think. How are you communicating with people? You have very deep ties to people.
I have like a little bit of Hindi, a very tiny, tiny bit. However, as you know, India was colonized by the British. The majority of people here do speak English as a second language for the most part. Um, not necessarily all the renunciates. I have met a lot of renunciates and sadhus like in my travels, especially with Yogi Tilaknath, because we have been on journeys, on pilgrimages to different temples. Like he's been very open about like telling me about places that I would have otherwise not known about. One could say, it's sort of in journalism that Yogi Tilaknath is kind of my fixer because he'll,
Yeah.
he'll tell me like
Okay.
exactly like where to go, how to get there.
This I understand. You
It's
have
been
some
actually
guidance. You have some guidance where because you're talking. Yes, I know that English is kind of widespread, but you've been to Nepal, you've been to Thailand. That's not the case there. These are difficult languages. You don't know them well, and you have never had trouble connecting with people. You're fearless for one thing. I mean, to go traipsing off in hills, not just hiking, but up hills in a place you've never been. I think, don't you think that just translates to people? They understand that you really are. interested, that you're curious about them, and that's freaking flattering.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it also goes with like learning the local culture. There was a lot I didn't know about sadhus until I met Yogi Tilaknath. For example, and I also think like it's really important to learn about culture because things that might be like, for example, normal in the West might be disrespectful in another culture. Like, for example, I learned for sadhus, for example, they don't share their food with anyone. Like, not to say that they don't share food, like they're hospitable, but like, for example, their plate, like it becomes really important that you don't take the human fluid of someone else. So you wouldn't share a plate with a sadhu, for example. Or if you drank from a bottle of water, you wouldn't give that bottle of water to a sadhu because you already had drunk from it.
You learn all these things. How will they affect you when you try reentry, when you come back to maybe you won't come back, but I assume you are planning to come back to the United States.
Sure. I think reverse culture shock is very real. I remember when I first left Bosnia for coming back to the United States, I did have a lot of reverse culture shock. Um, I think one of the big things that shocked me, I still remember the first day I came back to the US, I was in Washington, D.C., is the amount of abundance America has when it comes to things and options. You don't see that in other parts of the world. You know, you have like very little shops. They're usually run by local owners. They don't necessarily have everything you want. You kind of have to pick based on what's there. Whereas I remember the first time I came back to the United States, I think I had to pick up groceries because I just like got into my new apartment and there was nothing there. And I walked into a Whole Foods. And I
Oh,
remember being actually feeling dizzy by the amount of options, the amount of things that are available. And I kind of realized it's like, wow, like in other parts of the world, you make do with what's there. Or, you know, and in local, local business owners, whether you have like local bakeries, local meat shops, local, like there are all these small shops run locally by families. But also like food is fresher when you're abroad. There's not as much of like a lot of chemicals that go into like industrial food. Like if you're like buying like fresh produce, they tend to come from like farmers that are nearby.
mhm.
Versus like going back to the US, it's like you have all this abundance, but at the same time, all this abundance is I don't know like what the right word would be, but it kind of offers you an illusion of comfort or an illusion of almost coddles you in some ways because you have so much that you also kind of have a lack of connection to how other people in the world really live. Like, where does your food come from? Or, like there's a disconnection between yourself and I would say nature, right? Because in other parts of the world, people live so much more close to nature. Something I noticed when I went to Nepal, Nepal has a really fascinating tradition of sacred plants, of Ayurveda. And all Nepalis, they tend to know like what plants are used for medicinally. And I was just like, wow, there's this whole vast body of knowledge these people have that I definitely don't have.
Mhm.
But because they've lived so close to nature their entire lives, I was living in Nepal. I was staying in a village actually, right outside of Pokhara, which is in western Nepal. And in that village, like just to see like, and Nepal is amazing because every week there's a festival. I swear, every week there's a festival in Nepal. There's some kind of holiday going on weekly. But they have like this very interesting mix of both like Hindu and Buddhist traditions. But the villagers in particular have this closeness to plants and to nature I've not seen, you don't see in the West. In the West, like there's this disconnection from nature. And, all their rituals, all their festivals involve plants in some way, shape, or form. Like you'll
Mhm.
get a blessing with a piece of grass, or a certain plant represents something and it's offered to like a god. So for me, it's also kind of amazing to see like this different way of life or a different perception that other people have. And this connection to like the earth, like to nature that I feel has disappeared from the West in many ways. Like we've become like very afraid of nature or
Yeah.
very kind of like, oh, like everything everything is dangerous,
Right. No,
versus,
there's a disconnect.
there they let their kids just play around and
There's a disconnect, not just with nature, but with other people too. I lived for a while in Uganda, you know that. And I can remember one night we were traveling and the car broke down. It was a really old rickety car. It was a dark road, like a rutted path. And in the middle of the night, the car stops dead. And there's nothing like AA. No, you don't, AAA, you don't call for help. Um, there are no stations nearby, gas stations. I go, man, what? And I remember this sense of like huge fear, like now what the hell do we do? What happens now? And every car, like the next six cars that went by, all stopped. Several stopped, and the guys got out and they began working on the cars. And other cars would go by and ask, lean out the window and ask if they needed help. And you did that, and you expected that if your car was the one that broke down, people would do the same for you. That doesn't happen here. That was revelatory to me. And you're absolutely right about the choice. When I came back from Uganda to the United States, I can remember almost crying in the supermarket trying to pick out a shampoo. There were shelves and shelves of different shampoos. Like, what? That did not happen. Yeah, the abundance here. I felt so um, materialistic. I remember I came back and just threw out bags of, didn't throw them out, I donated them, bags of clothes and old books and all the surplus. It didn't last for long, and I've accumulated, I think, it all back. But there was a lesson that we got. People live differently, and the other thing about Bosnia, and you may remember this too, was the life in the streets at night after work. And work was never as important as it was to us. People would live their real lives. They would go to the cafes, and their kids would be in the streets playing with one another, and they would be sitting there smoking. Terrible, terrible. That's a bad habit. But sipping coffee and talking with each other, right? We don't have that.
yes. It's a community life. I think like that's really, and I do have this moment. I think I posted it on Facebook once, a little bit of a nostalgia of like the 90s felt so different in the United States. And I don't know if you also feel it like in your own generation that things were so different at one point where neighbors did know each other. People brought cakes for each other at home. Like, you know, parents would know each other. Their kids would sleep over at each other's houses. Sleepovers don't happen as much anymore, I heard, which I was a
Yeah.
little surprised by. And there was this sense of community where you grow up. And I don't know what's ruptured it over time, but I know that
It
in big cities in the United States, sometimes that
That comes back. When I
go
was
on.
overseas for longer periods of time than I have been lately, I would write fascinated by some of the things we're talking about, this community life, the sharing, the simplicity of it all the chickens in the middle of the street, herds of, sheep stopping traffic. And my mother would say, okay, that was like the life I lived, growing up in West Albany, New York. It was a backwardness almost, and that sounds negative. I don't mean it that way, but it was a simplicity that's been lost in the complications of American life. And right now, let me ask you about this, Stella. That we're at war again. The Middle East is exploding. Pakistan and Afghanistan, and of course, Israel now in the United States against Iran. It's dangerous in the part of the world where you're traveling. Is that affecting you, or do you feel very far away from it?
I think India feels slightly more stable than the rest of the world right now. I think I have been following geopolitics for quite a while. I'm very concerned about the future. There were definitely, and not to say that war in the Middle East hasn't impacted me. When I was actually flying to Rishikesh, the flights were all delayed because they had to turn around all the planes that were either headed to Europe because they had to use that airspace or headed to Tel Aviv, and all of them had to turn around and come back to India. Um, so, and that was the moment I opened my phone and realized that a war had started. I was like, oh wow, you know, that's unfortunate. I don't think war is ultimately good for anyone in the world. Um, my mother does worry often, in particular, because she's always sending me stuff. But equally, I would say like when I was in my late 20s, early 30s, and I was in the Balkans, in the United States, they were airing a lot of news about terrorism. They were airing news that, oh, there are terrorist attacks in Europe. As you know, in journalism, if it bleeds, it leads. And I think in the United States, mainstream media kind of shows the negative about the world a lot of the times because they're
Yeah.
like, okay, all these bad things are happening here. And it gives a perception that the world is a very dangerous place and you shouldn't leave your country ever. Um, but you and I were in Bosnia, and yes, there was terrorism at the time in Europe. There was a whole migration crisis, but we were always okay, like even living in Sarajevo in Bosnia. And I would say the same as well. It's like, yeah, there's more instability in the world now than I think there has ever been in the past. But I would also say that one of my biggest takeaways living in different countries is that ultimately there are more good people than bad. I
Wow.
think there are more good people out there who are willing to help you. There's always someone who's willing to help. I've actually found that in anything I've needed, that people tend to have a very neighborly spirit. I think bad people are in the few. They're not in the majority. And I found that even being here in India, despite the things going on in the Middle East, I mean, actually, the only thing that I'm aware of now is if they've closed all that airspace, I can't even go to Europe at the moment. Because I was thinking in the future, it's like, oh, maybe I should like fly off like to Europe for a little bit, maybe see some old friends. But now I'm like, oh, well, now for an indefinite amount of time, I might not be able to do that because we don't know how all this pans out, right? But I do think, like, generally speaking, I always say anyone who's going to do this, do your research before you go. There is always like some potential like dangers or instability. I know I have two friends who are stuck in Doha right now, which is not a great place to be
Right.
at the moment. But, the Qatari government is also doing their best to like protect everyone who's there and who's visiting. So, no matter what, everything is figure outable. I would say, even though the mainstream media might say like everything is dangerous, I would say to this, like wherever you go, you will always find people to help. You will
Mhm.
always find good people to welcome you, and you're always going to find hospitality, and especially as someone who's foreign. Um, I have made so many amazing friends in the course of my travel that I know that, I mean, I have a joke that if all hell breaks loose in the world, I have a couch anywhere I need, you know? So, that's always like a great comfort. And I think like you also offered me your couch. You're like, if anything happens, you come to me.
That's
I
true.
felt
I,
so
I do.
so
Yes.
warm-hearted when you said that to
I also think some of this
me.
anticipatory fear, and it seems to be uniquely American. We plan ahead and we fear a lot more. When I went to Uganda, people said, "Oh my God, but Idi Amin." Idi Amin had been dead for years, and his regime had been 30 years in the past. It had nothing to do with the current situation in that country. So we're behind in our education, and that makes us very fearful too. I think we do. I think you've got that right. We hear all about the bad things. There's disease, there's terrorism, like any place. Jordan, where I lived for several years, is an amazing country, and it should have the most tourism ever from Americans. It has everything in it. You've been there with me. We've been there. Wadi Rum in the desert and the Dead
Yes,
Sea and
it was
Amman
beautiful.
itself with Roman ruins and Petra, one of the wonders of the ancient world. It's an amazing country, affordable, excellent food, all the amenities, all the things Americans want, and it doesn't get a lot of tourism. And why? Because its neighbors are Syria and Iraq and Israel, and it's all too close. We're just afraid. It's just fear holds back a lot of Americans from travel.
And I think also it's like it's overcoming that barrier of fear. I always say like some people might feel uncomfortable by the idea of going to a foreign country and staying for like a long time. But once you get over that barrier of discomfort or fear and you just start doing it and you gain the experience of doing it, everything becomes a lot less fearful. You pick up so many friends along the way, as I said. You also become very good at travel logistics. which after a while is not so scary for you because you realize all I need to establish is the roof over my head, how to get from point A to point B, whether that's with an airplane or a taxi. In the developing world, I say it's really important because sometimes the driver ride sharing apps don't work. Definitely get some phone numbers of good drivers, whether it's through friends or even through whoever will host you. If you go through Airbnb, there's some really kind hosts who will give you like the phone numbers of drivers who you can pay them a taxi fare and they'll be able to take you anywhere you'd like. Um, and and also you realize you can live with less. I have reduced my life. When I was in Bosnia, it was two suitcases. I'm down to one. So now I manage on one suitcase. And I realize I really don't need that much clothing, every day. I can have like a set of clothing that's interchangeable and, it's easy to carry. And I realized like, wow, I had this whole closet full of clothes in the United States I never wore, but like all the clothing I have now, I'm wearing every day. I'm actually making use of it.
I got sick of everything I owned when
Yeah.
I was in Jordan and in Bosnia as well. But you are right. We have so much here, and so much of it we don't need. That is one of the lessons from living overseas. And I do think relying on
Mhm.
others. And also, I learned. Well, two things that you bring up. One is that when you have a problem, it's scary and awful in the moment, but they make the greatest stories. Those are the parts of living abroad you remember the most and talk about. And they make you feel really alive. When you're trying to get out of a dilemma, to get out of a dangerous situation, that's really living. And maybe the other one is just humor. People are the same everywhere in the world. And even when they're trying to rip you off, the taxi drivers and the people who ran the motorbikes uh, in Africa would see you with white skin and wanted to charge you more. And I would get into a conversation with them about how much extra they were allowed to charge me because I was white. I had to pay more, but I wasn't going to pay as much as they did. And we would laugh about it. It was, they were ripping me off and I was going to let them, but not as much as they wanted to. And they became friends, like you say. And it was all human. None of that seems to happen in here, and I don't know why. I wanted to bring some of what I learned there about spending time, wasting time, we would call it, in a cafe or talking with someone about how much they're going to rip you off. I wanted to bring that back, and I don't think I was successful in it.
Yeah, I mean it's and that's funny. It's the thing, it's the human connection. I also kind of wonder in different parts of the world where people don't necessarily have as much. I've seen in this part of the world, I've seen like a true levels of poverty that I've not seen
Yeah.
definitely in other places that I've traveled.
Scary level.
Um, and true levels of what could be very scary levels of human misery. I've seen people without limbs begging on the streets.
Yep.
I remember last year, I was kind of very stunned and shocked. I've seen a young girl with entirely burnt face, like from an acid attack of some kind. And and yet I see people in these situations like go on living. Like it just also reminds you of the level of human resilience and not just living, but also having friends, having community, still having people help them.
Yes.
Um, as you know, like in most parts of the world, there isn't a safety net. There isn't like the government is going to give you handouts and you're going to be okay.
Right.
People rely on other people so much more that having good relationships with each other is actually much more important than anything else. Um, and there is a sense like people will connect over anything. And like you're mentioning, like you're not going to scam me as much as you want. You can scam me, but not that much,
You have
like
the right to get
yeah, because
more,
at the end of the
not
day,
that
we're all yeah,
much.
like
Um,
we're all human at the end of the day. And if you can connect on this human level, like you're going
right.
to be fine wherever you are.
Really true. I have just looked at the clock, which I've forgotten to do because I love talking to Stella. I love talking about travel, and we're just about out of time. We always end with a toast, and mine to you is easy, Stella. Bon voyage. I love what you're doing. Do you have any idea about how much longer this is going to last? Do you have a plan of how much your money will hold up and how long you can continue to travel.
I live really cheaply, so I'm like very, very frugal. So if I have to, I can go another year and a half, maybe. But like ideally, like we don't want to be in that situation forever. We have to take care of ourselves. But for now, I feel kind of like relaxed about it. And I'm just like, I do believe life has a way of working out that whatever you need will show up at the right moment. So I definitely have. I had a little anxiety at the beginning, but I have a lot less now. Because at the end, it always works out, no matter, and everything is figure outable. This is something I share. No matter where you are, what you're doing, everything is figure outable. And I think that's also the most important lesson of travel.
Oh, I just love this. There's my toast, the finality of my toast. It's to figuring it out and seeing the world.